into it, and then so yeah, here we are. We're live. We'll just get into it a little bit, and then we'll play the theme and stuff. But
and you're perched on a rocking chair with arms. That's like that's like just to make everything really difficult for the guitarist.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the thing was I was inflicting the rocking chair on my guest usually, and I realized maybe I should do that. Maybe I should take that on.
Or maybe get another folding chair.
Yeah. This is a nice chair. This is Steve's dad made this. They made this chair.
You're 2 blocks from a Goodwill.
Yeah.
No.
You could just walk over there and then carry it over here, and voila.
Yeah, but then I'd have to change the name of the pod, and it's called Russell's Rocking Chair right now.
Is it really?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. I thought about I think you had mentioned to begin with a talking shop with Russell or something like that.
Yeah, talking shop.
And I think I did that one for a week, and what I had Russell's Wall of Sound that I started out with, and then
and they'll expect like something loud.
yeah, right, exactly. Well, I just figured wall like a Facebook wall, or you know what I mean. Anyway, Wall of Sound, but then I ended up landing on Russell's rocking chair, and now I'm realizing that that's another terrible idea that I had. Can we? So we just took a few seconds to learn one of David's newer songs. This is David Rovics, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Back again. We had David was our second guest that we had on, and beforehand we were kind of talking to you about some of the things that, or we were talking about ways that we might have a more successful pod, some keep us from making some mistakes, and technology we might use, and things we might do. I think some of which the advice we followed, and then others have kind of gone by the wayside. But
it's good if anybody's taking tech advice from me. They're not doing it right.
Your live streams sound really good. I don't know if you're recording locally or something like that, but those sound like like recordings to me. They sound real good.
Yeah, I've eventually figured out how to make it sound all right. Yeah, and it's not recorded locally though. It's just a regular live stream on StreamYard, and I think it was actually the last time that we were when we were doing something on StreamYard that I finally kind of arrived at the right setting for the volume so that it's not peaking and not too quiet. But it's only taken about 4 years to figure out.
Yeah, it's a lot, this stuff. It makes you really appreciate like what goes into some of these bigger podcasts. It's like they've clearly got teams working for them. If they can make it look that good and be that tight, and
the stuff that's like really well edited, like even just something that sounds decent. I mean, there's so much often I think like post production or other people involved, but I mean, I guess the basic sound of those nice microphones that everybody uses, which I'm using, the Shure
SM7,
that one, the same one Joe Rogan uses, and just about everybody uses that same one. And then I think the device I've got plugged into the laptop, this little red thing, what's it, Fire or something or other. It's also the thing that everybody uses. I mean, when I first decided to do a podcast, I just asked a friend who also podcasts and sounds really good, Ron Placone, what kind of equipment he uses and what app he uses. So I'm just still using exactly the same app and same equipment he told me to use.
So well, maybe I shouldn't ask. Did him and Jimmy Dore have like a falling out or something? Like, I mean, because he was all on Jimmy Dore's show all the time, and then all of a sudden just.
Yeah, I actually have no idea what happened there. No, but I know that for quite a while he was a regular guest and also a producer for Jimmy, and and now he's doing all kinds of other things, including recently performing around Scotland and doing stuff with my old friend Attila the stockbroker.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Jimmy Dore's got Kurt Metzger on all the time now, who's a really intelligent guy who can barely speak. Like, I don't know how to explain it. He starts sentences, but he's really funny. He makes it all work, and completely ADD like Jimmy Dore is, and it's sort of funny that they don't bash heads. I would think that him and Ron would have had a much better relationship because they were more yin and yang, whereas like those two are just like the same energy, you know, wild, passionate, you know, masculine meathead.
Right. Right.
I mean, I love Jimmy Dore, but he's, you know, I can't share him with people because he's just so offensive.
I like what I've seen, but I haven't seen that much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the sort of talk radio thing of you know, it's sort of half comedy, half talk radio, and I just kind of lose interest in that whole format. But it's not because it's not good. It's I think he's very good. Got good political points and very funny and also very popular, and all that's all really good. I just have a preference for dry, hard news and political commentary and stuff. So I'm just yeah.
Too, like the whole thing too, like stopping the footage and shouting at the screen for a while and then starting it over again. That gets old after a while to me too.
But it's cathartic, I'm sure, for a lot of people, right? I'm sure, and it's what we feel like doing all the time anyway. And I mean, I was just listening to the Israeli ambassador speak at the United Nations after this really weak ceasefire resolution finally passed today, and his speech was so offensive. Every sentence was so horrifically offensive and such terrible historical revisionism and just misrepresentation of reality. And I just wanted to stop press pause every 5 seconds and shout and also just correct what he's saying. I mean, I actually came home and transcribed the entire speech. I mean, which I was surprised to find that there's no easy transcription of UN speeches that's immediately available on the internet. I mean, at least my efforts to find them came up with nothing, but I transcribed his speech, and it reminded me of my teens transcribing all kinds of stuff. But anyway, I can still transcribe stuff pretty fast, but I want to write something and respond to everything he said because it's just so offensive. But yeah, or if I had a podcast like Jimmy's, I'd just stop and shout it instead.
Yeah, hearing Netanyahu speak that's the most hateful rhetoric I've ever heard in English.
Yeah, and what he says in
I've seen
Hebrew.
translations of Hitler, you know, like saying stuff, and I've seen, you know, translations of like supposedly what Putin said or whatever, but I have never heard in English somebody speak with so much clear hatred.
Yeah, I mean, really clear hatred and clear and genocidal intent.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then what they say in Hebrew is much worse. But there's plenty in English that the Israeli leadership has said that is clearly, talking about collective punishment and that it's deserved and that's what they're doing, and that everybody in Gaza is basically responsible for anything Hamas ever did. And
yeah, that's and as an American, that just really like is terrifying to think that, like, because I don't feel responsible for what my government does. You know, I feel remorse. I feel like I want it to stop, but for me to be personally responsible for what my government has done, it's so absurd.
If you follow the Israeli leadership's logic, then all of us in the United States are responsible for everything our government does, and we should all pay the price for everything bad that our government does. Of course, not that they would want to apply their logic to the United States, to their benefactor, but the logic is that if you live in a democracy and you elect a government, then every citizen, including babies, are responsible for everything that government does. That's their logic.
Yeah. Do we want to play that song we were?
Speaking of babies.
Yeah. I really was impressed by this song.
Thank you.
Yeah.
She was looking for a place to have a baby, but with the hospitals destroyed, She headed south in a donkey cart to give birth to her little boy. She wasn't lying by a manger, no hay beneath her on the ground. She couldn't hear her newborn's cries, with the bombs exploding all around. There's baby Jesus lying in the rubble, a hungry little bag of skin and bones, with his mother Mary broken there beside him, in the place that they were calling a safe zone. Without a blanket, without a drop of water, nothing between them and the sky. The wise men from the east tried to come to see him, but they're trapped at the crossing in Sinai. There's no fuel for the water pumps, only for the drones always buzzing overhead, reminding every child there beneath them, the next moment it could be your mama dead. There's baby Jesus lying in the rubble, a hungry little bag of skin and bones, with his mother Mary broken there beside him, in the place that they were calling a safe zone. He's the Son of God, said the angel, as the babe began to shiver from the cold. There was a twinkle in his eye for a moment before the rigor mortis took hold. This prophet who was born to save our species, this child who was the only son, all the tens of thousands killed so far, now we can add another one. There's baby Jesus lying in the rubble, a hungry little bag of skin and bones, with his mother Mary broken there beside him, in the place that they were calling a safe zone. In the place that they were calling a safe zone. In the place that they were calling a safe zone.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about this the other day, that never in my lifetime have I seen anything like this. Really,
Yeah.
that was this bombing people in a refugee camp.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't. I mean, not since I was a small child, as far as I know, has there been any kind of a bombing campaign that is remotely this extensive. Like, not since the United States Air Force bombed Hanoi in 1972. I don't know of anything like this. And then, of course, even that was even not nearly as extensive as what's happening. I mean, the amount of tonnage used on Gaza, I think is unique in even in terms of cities that have been bombed with nuclear weapons. I mean, the amount of tonnage that's been used is more than twice the size of the Hiroshima bomb on Gaza.
Tonnage, you mean by?
The tonnage, I guess that's how they measure the explosives. You know, they got these bombs they call, 1-ton bombs or, half-ton bombs or whatever. And these are the kinds of bombs that can take down like a 12-story apartment complex.
Mm-hmm. And so you were just traveling in Europe recently. This is just something that's not really spoken about that much, or around here, and this is supposedly a liberal city, you know what I mean, Portland, but I don't really hear people talking about it much. Like, I think I still feel like there's a certain freeze on that conversation, even now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think it's, I don't know of anywhere that in the United States where it's really front and center being talked about it by, we're mostly seeing is small actions, small protests, and then, it's not like in many other countries that I've been to recently where you see marches happening in every city every weekend and lots of continual, constant mobilization and Palestinian flags being flown all over the place. It's in England, it's very different, but I mean, it's also true that in England, well, there's a much bigger Muslim population, but also the movement is mostly not Muslim. But there's definitely, I think it's probably significant that there is a bigger Muslim population, and you can see how they are, a really big part of the movement that galvanizes it in a lot of ways. I'd say, Yeah, so I mean, there is that difference.
I've heard even in Israel, it's different. That like in Israel, there's more protests and more news being, more ink being spilled about this whole thing than there is here.
Well, I mean, definitely more ink being spilled, but it's mostly horrific propaganda, and it's not at all like telling people what's really going on. But definitely they can't ignore it. It's their sons and daughters that have mobilized to go invade their Gaza. But their propaganda is worse than ours, and ours is terrible. I mean, here I guess I just saw a poll recently that where 50% of Americans aren't sure if there's been more Palestinians killed or more Israelis killed in this war. And, that tells you a lot about news sources. And, I mean, the death toll among Palestinians, for anybody listening that isn't aware of this, has been many, many, many times worse. I mean, this is only one side has the Air Force and they're using it,
Yeah. When did you write Promised Land?
Soon after the 9/11 attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. I see. Okay, so I was curious about cause we were listening to that this morning, and the last stanza in there you have about a pilot, and I was confused about that because I thought Hamas doesn't really have an active Air Force.
Yeah, no Air Force unless you count the paragliders.
Yeah, right.
No, that was a song about the 9/11 attacks from the perspective of one of the hijackers.
Yeah. Can we do that one?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. I'll get this.
This is one of those ones that makes me cry every time I hear it.
Oh.
Which makes me. Do you are you in therapy?
Well, no, I probably should be. But definitely.
I'm not just asking because you're Jewish from the East Coast, but
yeah, which is So I mean, most of my family members have been in therapy at some point, I suppose. But no, But I mean, writing songs like about all the horrible stuff that goes on is therapeutic in itself, and then if you write songs that make you cry, that's therapeutic too, and generally I stop crying after the first dozen times of doing it, so I'm not actually crying on the stages, but I know exactly what you mean, obviously. If I write a good song, if it turns out really good, then of course it's going to make me cry, and hopefully it makes a lot of other people cry too,
So it takes you a few times playing through something, because I've noticed that, like, that you're always very, that you seem really strong when you're singing these songs, but man, like the first few lines, I just like break down when I hear some of these things.
Because if you're thinking about it, yeah.
I mean, the idea, Promised Land, like the idea of being pushed to a point where you're this person is clearly intelligent, clearly thoughtful, clearly family oriented, clearly has everything to live for, and is just in this situation that is undeniable, that they have to react
do something
to. And it's just anyway, let's play.
And with what's been happening, we'll be seeing so much more of this sort of thing. It's just like physics. Life could have been different. You think I don't know? Could have been born in Paris or in the Wisconsin snow. But I'm from this desert, and here I will stand, and I will meet you in the Promised Land. I went to college to be an engineer. Thought I'd do something useful, but what good is that here? When your jet fighters bomb any buildings that stand, I will meet you in the Promised Land. The life of the fighter I didn't choose, but I love my people, and I can follow your cues. If destroying our world is your leader's command, I will meet you in the Promised Land. If it's true, if we go any place better when our life here is through. But you've butchered my family, you must understand. I will meet you in the Promised Land. I know it's not pretty, but for all that you've done, for all the widows and orphans, for all the wars that you've won, I must teach you a lesson. Maybe you'll understand. I will meet you in the Promised Land. So I will get in this plane, and when it's in the air, to your symbols of power and our source of despair, I'll look through the cockpit and steady my hand, and I will meet you in the Promised Land. I will meet you in the Promised Land. promised land.
Yeah. So I tried to ask you this before when we had you on, but I felt like we went away. But I'm so curious. How do you approach a song? Do you have is it lyrics first? Is it song? Is it melody first?
It's concept first. What story I want to tell, or sometimes I just come up with a refrain that it clearly is trying to tell a story and just needs a story to wrap around it to sort of go with the theme of the refrain.
What would be an example of that?
I guess like this last song, "I Will Meet You in the Promised Land." I mean, that was that's probably what came first.
The chorus kind of came to you first.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I don't remember now, but that's usually that would be usually how it would go. I was probably not thinking first, I want to write a song from the perspective of a hijacker. That might have been what I was thinking, but if that concept was what I had in mind first, then it would have been the refrain that came next, one or the other. But then also this song, it's also employing a strategy that I discovered around that time and used repeatedly, which every time I think it works, which is to basically have a surprise ending. So if you haven't heard the song before, then you don't know until you get near the end that this is a perspective of a hijacker of one of the planes that hit the Twin Towers. Like, you don't figure that out until probably, it might be not until the last verse that you realize. Although depending on, how clued in you are, it might be earlier, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I can't remember. There was a book that you suggested to me years ago that really kind of laid out the earlier life of Osama bin Laden and just how
like in the 80s, when in Afghanistan, when he was in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Great War for Civilization by Robert Fisk.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the
amazing book.
Yeah, that was incredible. His meeting with Osama bin Laden
in the first chapter.
Yeah.
The book starts with a bang.
Yeah. 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 And then but just learning about how he created like the first. With his construction company, this really, his big construction company that he had, he made like the first road across like the whole country.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, the whole bin Laden family, I think, is like coming out of a big, they're very wealthy in the construction business in Saudi Arabia. Right.
Right.
And, but yeah, I mean, bin Laden. I mean, there's these groups evolve, and they respond to reality as it happens, and they don't just start out. They don't just continue to be whatever they were set up to be in the first place. Oftentimes, with the involvement of Western intelligence agencies, they don't just stay the way they're supposed to be, or the way they were designed to be by the intelligence agencies. Because we're talking about real people, and so things happen. And I think the analogy of religious movements historically is kind of like roughly at least related anyway. Like I was reading this book, Fantasyland, a few years ago, and every Protestant sect that has ever come out of the United States has started out being completely lunatic, and then over the course of a generation or two, they get a little more toned down and reasonable, and then the next lunatic fringe kind of sect comes around, and it's not that all these resistance groups follow that trajectory or start out lunatic and then get more reasonable, but that does happen actually. With groups, especially the ones that have the CIA and Mossad all over their origins. They often improve over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that I what I was surprised about was just that he seemed to have he seemed to be very popular within the country at one point.
Absolutely.
You know, that he was highly regarded,
and after 9/11, he became one of the most popular people in the world. I mean, let's be honest about it, right? I mean, you know, this is the United States. We have our own biases and media and all that kind of stuff, and we've got, you know, and for a lot of people, you know, hearing somebody say something like that, which is a statement of fact, is you know, shocking, right? But outside of the United States, it's a really different world. You know, outside of the West, you know, there's a genocide going on in Gaza. You know, and the elections that are happening here are not part of the news cycle. You know,
yeah.
and outside of the West, you know, the global South fought back. You know, and hit the capitalists right in the center of capitalism. You know, and all those people around the world who were resentful of the American capitalists for strangling and their economies and for backing military dictators and overthrowing their democracies. I mean, this is how the people around the world thought of the United States, and people around the world wanted retribution against the United States for the horrible things that the United States has done in their countries. I mean, you can name the country, and we can talk about what horrors the United States has been, you know, supporting in their country, and you know, what the United States has done to their country. You know, you just almost without exception, you just go down the line. You know, why people would want revenge against the United States, you know, and this is what people thought around the world. People had parties all over the world, you know, not because they weren't thinking about the children in the daycare in the Twin Towers. You know, they're just thinking about the symbolism of it and the number of bankers and capitalists and wealthy people that inevitably are going to be killed when you attack buildings like that. I mean, nobody, you know, people don't rent, you know, a floor of the World Trade Center if they're in working class. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, which is why I thought it was really obscene the way that Obama did like a victory lap and
when Osama bin Laden was killed.
And
yeah,
like,
absolutely. I mean, it
just seemed like so provocative.
It's such idiocy. It's not understanding, you know, the whole context of this. I mean, it was 9/11 was
also really shady burying him at sea. Like they just.
Oh yeah, like, you know, not wanting anybody to have a grave to visit.
Yeah. That was I guess that was the idea.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
And it also just seemed shady. Like
I not wanting to show who, you know, his DNA, his body. I mean, you know, proof that you killed him.
Yeah, I figured he was. I had years before. I figured he'd already been dead for years, and that they were pretty much just never going to find him. And then when that happened, I thought, like, is that what happened? He like they just suddenly decided to take credit for it, or you know what I mean? So, I don't know. It was
Who knows? So shady.
It was. Yeah, it was very strange. And I can't imagine that was. Anyway, just more provocation. Yeah. Huh. So wait, on a lighter note, let's see if I can find this. So one of the reasons that we started this pod was to try and you know, meet more people, reach out to more people, and just kind of see who we meet, you know. And it's been interesting. It's like we've had Steve had his good friend Polly on, who was really fascinating, and we had this guy Reggie Houston, who played with Fats Domino for like 22 years, and he hung out and jammed with us for like hours afterwards, and was just super cool. And now he's talking about like doing some shows with us and stuff, and so that's been really cool. And then the funniest thing, I got to go find my phone, but is that there's been this girl from Japan, or woman from Japan, that's been like, you know, liking all of our videos and stuff. And I finally like went and like checked out her stuff, and it is the trippiest.
She might be probably watching right now. She's probably listening to what
yeah, it is the trippiest, most psychedelic stuff. It's like really
cool.
Upbeat, but all right, I'm gonna go grab my phone. I'll play a little bit of it for you.
Yeah, we've been enjoying her videos. They're great. I like them a lot.
psychedelic.
Yeah.
What's up?
Her name was.
Oh, Kuriko Kaleidoscope.
Yeah, Kuriko Kaleidoscope, I think. Yeah.
Great.
You've been meeting people all over France most recently. Is that correct?
Yeah, we were recording. I was recording in France for the first 18 days of February, and then touring in England for the last 11 days or so of February. Yeah, lots of gigs in England that were organized by Palestine Solidarity groups. Very active scene everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, we were listening to a little of your podcast talking about your experiences in France and just the food at the stores. The disposable, paper.
Nothing disposable. Yeah.
Friendly people. Beautiful villages. And
yeah.
It sounded great.
Really great.
It's like I want to go there right now.
Oh, I love it. Southern France. I'd never been there. So beautiful. Uh-huh.
That sounded like Ornette Coleman type of stuff right at the beginning.
And the images are just like just the most tripped out.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's all this like flashing imagery. It's very David Lynch, like cut, like it's all black and then it'll just be like flashes of images.
Right.
But yeah, it's amazing how different people write, right? I mean, like, I could never imagine coming up with something like this.
I'd never, no.
But she loves us. She loves our stream. She always like comments about how
it's great. Now, if I did the right psychedelic drugs and had a synthesizer to play with and not much else to do for a long time, I understand how it could happen, you know. Cool.
Yeah. Anyway, at some point I thought about maybe doing a stream with her and just and
that'd
maybe
be fun.
I don't know if we need a translator.
We got them available.
I wonder. Yeah. Do you think?
I'm sure Reiko or any number of other people around here I know could help you with that.
Oh, right on. Cool. Yeah, I have no idea. I imagine she might not speak much English, but I'd have to find out.
Yeah, there's a fine community of bilingual Japanese and English speakers in this town.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, Kuriko Kaleidoscope. I was really impressed.
Yeah, great.
But yeah, so with your I remember you were doing an interview show during the pandemic, but you kind of have let that go right enough for these more narrative podcasts.
Yeah, I was doing the narrative things also during the pandemic. I was just doing a lot more interviews than anything else, and then I after things started opening up again, and I didn't have so much free time anymore, then I pretty much decided the thing that was going to go was the interviews, and when touring came back, and yeah.
Is touring something that have you been able to make that lucrative again since is that something that has that been something that's been lucrative for you since things have opened back up?
I mean, definitely would not use the word lucrative.
I know.
Because
I know.
But because definitely like the bottom fell out of the whole music, business 10 years ago when Spotify started their free tier, in 2013, and I pretty much overnight stopped selling CDs. So, half my income was gone, and I stopped touring in the United States because it was no longer viable.
And what happens if you boycott Spotify, if you don't use Spotify?
Oh, I don't know, because I mean, I know people who don't use it and still sell CDs. I don't think they're selling CDs in anything like the kind of quantities they used to, but I don't know. I just I don't think it's practical to boycott Spotify because most people listen to music through Spotify. So you're just kind of like excluding yourself from being discovered by most people that are discovering music out there, because the way they're doing it is through Spotify. And the algorithm is very good. I mean, it really works. So as far as that goes, as far as like, building an audience and all that, I mean, there's a lot of other ways I'd prefer to build an audience, like the way I was doing it before. But I think like once the superhighway exists, you can't get people to just use the dirt roads anymore. They're gonna use the superhighway, and you gotta then work with that and set up tolls that are where the money isn't all going to the to Spotify or to the big three record companies or however it's set up. But I mean, touring in Europe is still, I wouldn't call it lucrative, but it's still worth doing, but my whole business model involves getting people to donate a lot of the elements that are involved, like plane tickets and of course I'm staying with people. I'm never staying in hotels, and it's a very shoestring kind of operation, but when you do it that way, then you can go to Europe and play gigs and come back with more money than you left with, at least.
Yeah. And so has that been part of how you've really been saving money lately, is by using asking people for frequent flyer miles and for
yeah definitely. There's and also like just crowdfunding everything in general, crowdsourcing in general, like Patreon and Substack, and basically appealing to people to make monthly or annual contributions in exchange for all the free content. I mean, it's a luckily, I guess, for better or for worse, in the United States, it's a business model that a lot of people are already familiar with. Anybody who listens to public radio or Pacifica, or who is involved with funding, the Nature Conservancy or the Sierra Club or any number of other, the ACLU. Everybody knows that, these organizations and, media outlets like this, that's how they fund them. So they do their free work, or their free, give out their free content, and in exchange, some people support them financially. So it wasn't like reinventing the wheel to sort of do this, but it's been necessary, and it's been a sort of a thing that artists have adopted on a massive scale, and journalists and all kinds of other professions as well. And I think the reason why it's been adopted so much is not just because it's possible to do with all these platforms and stuff, but because it's necessary. Very few artists or journalists would or any number of other professions would survive today without crowd-sourced support or some other kind of patronage. Like in Europe, they get patronage from the government. If you're running a newspaper in Sweden and you have 2,000 subscribers, the government will pay for you to have 7 full-time middle-class paid staff members. If you're a musician in France, you do 43 gigs a year, and then the government gives you 14,000 euros on top of whatever you just made. So that you can be a middle-class musician, and 14,000 euros goes a long way when your rent is only 300 euros a month, in a regulated economy like theirs.
And so you also collect money through your website too, right? Isn't that what you did first? Like, chronologically, what was the order like?
First,
I was thinking about this the other day, like Dar Jamal, right? He was one of the first journalists that I saw that really like impressed me with independent journalism.
Right.
And I went to go. He presented in a hall which I don't think would happen anymore, up in Bellingham at the college there, and he just showed the pictures that he had taken while he was there. So Dar Jamal went into Iraq and took pictures of exactly what had happened to people after the shock and awe.
He was unembedded, as they said at the time. He was. He would have they would have been calling him unembedded, right? So he was not traveling around with the military. He was independent, and he was there in Fallujah when the United States completely destroyed Fallujah, and he did such great reporting and such
right. And he put himself in a lot of danger doing so, and but also came away with these pictures that were just undeniable. You had pictures of an elderly couple that was bombed in their sleep, burned in their sleep. They were clearly sleeping, You had, just you saw the pictures of the nails. They had these bombs that they dropped that just burst in nails everywhere. And anyway, he just showed all that, and you could see it, and it was clear. And anyway, I just wondered, at that time, what he probably made money through his blog, through asking for money that way, or was it, how did he?
I don't know how he was surviving. If he was, because a lot of these crowdfunding platforms didn't exist back then.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just wondered, but I feel like there's always been some form of it, freelance or not. So anyway, in your world, you started out on doing that through your site, right? Through your own.
I mean, if we're going as far back as Dar Jamail in 2003 and that period, then it's worth noting that.
Well, I'm just curious about that transition.
The transition was at that time. None of us needed that kind of any help like that. We didn't need to ask anybody for money because first of all, if you were an artist, like you recorded an album, and you might have. I typically would spend $5,000 on making a recording with hiring a whole bunch of great musicians in a studio and making a recording. And then then I'd sell the CDs at shows, and basically once you sell the first 500 CDs, which would be like maybe a month and a half of touring, then everything else is gravy. So that you're making money, and the math. I mean, you sell 3,000 CDs in a year. That's a lot of money, $30,000, and then you on top of that you're having gigs, and for Dar and for me. I mean, Dar might not have been selling CDs, but I know he was doing a lot of speaking at campuses, and back then. It was for somebody like him to get paid $2,500 to get to talk at a campus was not unusual, and getting paid $1,000 was very common. And for me as a musician, I was usually, discount rate. Just getting $500 for a gig, which now sounds amazing, but back then was like very little to ask for from a student group. And if you were, I had more work than I could possibly do. I was touring 10 months out of the year, and I never needed to leave this country because I could have been touring constantly the whole time in the U.S. And I chose to tour in other countries just because I could get gigs in other countries, and I wanted to see the rest of the world. And, and I'm sure it was the same for Dar at that time, because there's thousands of colleges in this country, and they used to be loaded with money, for hiring speakers and musicians, and that ended, and I can tell you who could explain why it ended, who understands exactly what happened legally and everything, but that ended by 2006 or so, and then. I mean, for me, I don't know about Dar or independent journalists, but as a musician, it was all just still okay, because even without the college gigs, you could still get the other gigs, and you could still sell plenty of albums, CDs. I mean, contrary to Spotify's narrative, which I just received in email form, the other day, because I think every time there's new campaigns to try to get them to pay better, then they pretend to do their annual let's tell you about how great we are, and it's not it's like they pretend it's an annual thing that they do, but I'm pretty sure it's not. It's just they do it whenever there's, like right now, a bill in Congress to try to get them to pay a penny per play, and that the United Musicians, whatever this group that I just joined, what's it called? UNAM, or I can't remember. And it's a new musicians union, and they're mainly going after Spotify to get them to pay better.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were the one who informed me that basically you were always in competition on Spotify. You were always in competition with whoever performed best.
Yeah.
So basically, it's not just like how many plays you got.
Nope.
You, David Rovics, got, but it's how many plays you, David Rovics, got against
as a percentage of the whole.
Bruno Mars.
Yeah. So if somebody like Bruno Mars had a hit this week, then your percentage of the entirety of the streams on Spotify might have gone down significantly from one month to the next. Yeah, that's how they do it.
With the exact same number of plays.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. But
Yeah.
but what Spotify will say is you know, they'll pretend in their narrative, they'll pretend that there's no difference between independent musicians and, you know, pop stars, and they'll pretend that we were all suffering, you know, after the internet came around and MP3s came around, that all of us musicians were suffering from all this piracy, and that then the legal platforms like Spotify came around and saved the day and allowed us to make some money from all this streaming, you know, even if we were, you know, not selling albums anymore. You know, that's their narrative, you know, but the reality for me, and I think for a whole lot of other independent musicians, is long after Spotify existed, we were still selling loads of albums, and long after so-called piracy, you know, existed on the internet, we were still selling loads of albums. And the piracy was, you know, if you're gonna like copy somebody's music and put it up on the web for everybody to download, it's a bit of effort, you know, at any point, even now, it's a bit of effort, you know. You're going to at least spend a couple hours or something, or, you know, a few minutes doing it. And people just don't want to bother ruining the careers of independent artists like that. They didn't do it, as far as I found. You know, they did it to the pop stars, that they figured they didn't need the money, so we'll just give away their music for them. You know, but I didn't find that was a problem at all. I gave away my own music on my own terms. I harvested emails for that from people in exchange for free downloads, which is an amazing deal for the musicians, you know. And I recommend it to anybody, but it's now not possible because everybody's on Spotify, and they control all the communication, and they get everybody's emails, and you know, we don't get any of that, you know. We just get the crumbs that they throw us, you know. But but you know, it was when they started their free tier that it ruined things, you know, for the independent musicians, not before that. It was 2013.
What's the free tier?
Where anybody can listen to all the music of the world for free. You know, that's how it is on Spotify for the past 11 years. And the way that they did that, the way that they were able to do that, was by making a deal with the big three record companies that they agreed to have all their music on Spotify for free, which means that basically whatever is coming into Spotify from all the, you know, streaming and everything, the big three labels, artists get 70% of the whole, you know, the whole thing. And the independent artists, which make up most of the music on Spotify that people are listening to, we get the rest, you know. And then, you know, so it's just, and also the percentage, the amount that they were paying per play plummeted when they started their free tier. And then everybody else started, all the other platforms started going down, you know, to compete with Spotify.
So do you make money from any sort of you know, play, any sort of like online music platform? Is that really like where? I mean, do you really make money from any like SoundCloud or anything like that? Does that really get you
No.
paid anything?
No, because everybody's on Spotify. So,
Right.
like, I mean, you know, I will get an average of like $500 a month from all streaming platforms combined, and I think about probably about like a little less than half of that is from Spotify, and I'm in the top 4% of artists on Spotify.
As far as numbers of plays?
As far as numbers of plays. So that's like that kind of money. We're talking about 800,000 plays on Spotify per year, and then another several million on other platforms altogether. Spotify estimates that if you're getting 800,000 plays on Spotify, that represents probably a quarter of what you're getting on the you know, all together on all the different platforms. So that's the kind of, you know, several million plays a year, and then, you know, you end up with about $500 a month. And according to this campaign, the penny per play campaign that the Musicians Union is involved with, they say that according to their calculator thing, you know, a musician like me specifically, I would make, my earnings would go from $500 a month to $3,000 a month if I were getting paid 1 penny per song streamed, which is an interesting thing because for whatever reason that gets to be like the same kind of money I used to make from CD sales.
That would be nice.
Yeah, it would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's also like, a strange reality that, I made way more money on as a singer-songwriter in my 30s than I do, in my 50s, Not because I was better then or had a bigger audience then,
And that's accounting for inflation, all that, just straight across the board, numbers-wise, you made more money then than you do now?
Oh, yeah. Way more.
Yeah.
Both for the gigs and for the sales.
And it's more, and again, it's mostly from Substack, Patreon, and
I started out setting up this crowdfunded thing on my just directly on my website, and I think Patreon might have existed at that point, but I'm not sure. But my accountant suggested the idea because she had heard an interview with a musician who had started this thing of crowdfunding their life, so they could pay for their own recordings and not have to figure out how to pay for them, and just everything. They could pay the rent and just be musicians. So they were calling it like the 1,000 friends idea, of getting 1,000 friends to send you $5 a month, and that's so I've never achieved 1,000, but that was the goal, and it remains the goal. But I just adopted this idea and set it up with PayPal buttons on my website, and it was absolutely life changing. And then I had no idea whether it would work or whether there were people out there, who wanted to support me like that. I had no idea, but I figured, at that point when I started in 2013, it was really like, am I going to start driving for Uber, or am I going to figure out some other way to make money from music other than playing gigs and selling merch? Because neither of those things was paying the rent, by themselves. So I started this community supported art project on my website that I called it, and I still call it my CSA. And it was it made a huge difference. And then when Patreon eventually, I think 6 years later, I got on Patreon, and I will forever regret having waited for 6 years to do that, because getting on Patreon then dramatically increased my earnings, because there's a lot of people out there apparently who wanted to support me but couldn't be bothered to set up a PayPal account, and they already were on Patreon, and so because I was on this platform they were already familiar with, then they started supporting me on there. So I always recommend to anybody out there, from my own personal experience, don't choose between platforms, just get on all of them. And it's the same with Substack. There's a very large and loyal audience on Substack that only probably does things through Substack, and most of their reading they do on Substack, and when they support people, it's through Substack, and they're probably more oriented towards journalism than towards the arts. So they kind of have their little areas of sort of specialization. I'd say there's a lot more journalists on Substack, a lot more musicians on Patreon.
So I've been more of a side man than a songwriter. Is that something that that I could do or have any success with, do you think? Or is that something that you think is more geared towards people who are creating very specific content? Do you think it's like your political stance that has something to do with people's interests, or is it or do you think there's a lot of people who actually just want to support artists who are working?
I think that there's, I think there's definitely totally not non-political. I hate using that term because it sounds like an insult or something, and I don't mean it that way at all. But there's, and I don't know why it would sound like an insult, but because I'm so political, I don't mean to say that artists that aren't political are, anything wrong with that. But for artists, probably don't need to have just said that, but for artists that aren't political at all, they still, there's a lot of them out there that still totally get lots of support like this. So it is clearly not just about being political, but for my audience, it probably is, and And definitely, like when things are happening, like when I'm writing more songs about Gaza, I definitely note the increase in supporters with Arab last names and that kind of thing. Like that, so there's clearly connections going on here, but But I think that whatever it is you do, you got to be able to create regular content of some kind to share with your supporters, so they, because then they know you're still doing things. And I don't think they need you to be reminding them nearly as often as I do that you've got new content. I'm often told that by people on Patreon that they get more messages from me than from anybody. So I think I might be overdoing it, but. You can, but I think you do have to sort of remind them of your existence now, frequently, and share stuff.
Well, what I've noticed here is that these interviews,
such as these interviews, yeah,
these interviews do a few numbers. But what we seem to have more luck with is our music live streams.
Mm-hmm.
When I just set up the camera over here, pointed at the band, and we just have a very casual jam. And that actually seems to get more views for us than these interviews, which is sort of surprising to me, because I feel like there's a lot of music out there. There's a lot of people playing jazz standards or whatever it is that we happen to be doing. Some of them, sometimes we're doing new original jazz, and stuff like that. But again, I don't really think of there being a massive audience for instrumental modern jazz that's not recorded at a really really well. You know what I mean? Like it's fine. It's a room recording. It's people jamming. I think it's genuine. That's one thing that people like about it.
But you'd think, like with people like Jimmy Dore having like 100,000 listeners every week. I mean, it's much more produced and all that. But like, there's so many podcasts that have so many more listeners than either any of us in this room have ever had on podcasts. And I never quite understand what it's all about.
Some of them are just terrible. Like, there's a lot of them like that just start out with 8 minutes of ads. And then it's just two guys talking about their dicks for
right
for 2 hours, and then that's it, and it's every week. And for some reason, we were watching one last night where the host just completely turned on the guest just completely turned on the host, and she's like, I can't believe people enjoy listening to you.
Right? It's so boring. What are we even doing here? Yeah, that's funny.
Can I go?
But then if it's a popular show, then it's funny, right? If it weren't a popular show.
That's they made it work, you know what I mean? But yeah, she's looking at her phone at one point, and they're like, I think she's bored. And they're like, no, she's not bored. And she's like, yeah, she's bored. But anyway, yeah, just.
But with music, I find the same thing. I mean, when I play music and it's on the weekend, and it's announced in advance, that's when I get the most listeners. Mm-hmm. If anything that I do during the weekdays, whether it's music or talking, it gets far fewer listeners, and definitely the music gets way more attention than talking, from my experience.
Interesting. So music on weekends.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, it's so funny because it just seems like there's so many talk-based podcasts that do so well,
mm-hmm.
and then but then just jamming on some tunes seems pretty casual for me. It seems to get more viewership. Do you play locally much?
Very little. I mean, before I moved to Portland in 2007.
And why is that, David?
No, it's actually, it actually has nothing at all to do with the cancellation campaigners of whether we're talking about the so-called anti-fascists or the Zionists, who are far more numerous, by the way, than the so-called anti-fascists, although they say exactly the same things. And have exactly the same kind of tone and use exactly the same emojis and are basically possibly in some cases exactly the same people.
Well, yeah, let's talk a little about this. So you were saying that you had almost totally on Facebook, getting.
Oh yeah, in the past few weeks, well,
it sounds so fishy. It sounds like bots to me almost.
I mean, first of all, like as far as all the cancellation campaigners go, it should be noted that my career in this country collapsed 11 years ago. So the cancel and having nothing to do with them, but everything to do with the economics of being a working musician. It has to do with just being a not being rich and not having a trust fund to fund my activities with. I have to pay exorbitant rent and to support a family, and that doesn't work as a working musician in this country anymore. From my experience,
It's a bummer when you kind of figure that one out, right? That so many of the musicians that you like are actually from wealth.
Yeah, well, that's true, but actually, that is true. But also, a lot of it also used to be much more possible to be a actual working musician, and I know many of them who are who were not from wealth and who made a good living traveling around this country and performing, and it's because of the college gigs. Because there used to be so many college gigs. It was a great equalizer. You didn't have to be. You didn't have to have a trust fund. You just had to be pretty good at organizing, tours, and that certainly had to have business skills and connections and people listening to your music. So there's always advantages to being rich, but it wasn't necessary, and it's become much more necessary, and the statistics bear it out. And like Bill Derezowitz's book, The Death of the Artist, is in 2020, really lays it out really well in terms of the statistics, and it's only gotten much worse since 2020. In terms of you look at the taxes, and it's like the number of people that say that they are full-time artists, today are overwhelmingly. White and male, which doesn't, but by itself doesn't tell you a whole lot. But you dig deeper and you realize like what this represents is basically it's the whiter and more male and more wealthy, and people that have a house that they inherited and a trust fund and whatever else, so that they don't need to actually make most or all of their income from performing. It just gets more and more like that. Whereas in like Sweden, for example, Sweden produces more hits than any other country per capita in the world, right? In English language pop charts, Swedish songwriters, right? And why is that? It's not because the Swedes are all rich. They're mostly a comfortable but working class society, but they have funding for the schools, and everybody in elementary schools learns to sing in harmony and read music. And then, when you're older and you want to pursue a career in music, the Swedish government and Swedish labor unions have apartments that they rent in New York and Nashville and Los Angeles, where songwriters can go there and stay for free and participate in, in stuff. I mean, and this is all facilitated by the government. It doesn't. You don't need to be coming out of money there, to take advantage of that, which is why they produce more than anywhere.
So nationally, the United States or colleges in the United States used to support artists, and now they really don't. And do you think that has to do with the CIA infiltrating colleges? Do you think that has to do with colleges not wanting to deal with cancellation campaigns? Do you think it's a combination of the two?
I would say, from my experience, they're not. They may be related to each other, but as far as I know, they're not. But the
CIA, gets into any sort of like the American Indian movement. Black Panthers.
Well, that's true. There's no doubt about all that. But the like here in Portland, it's a famous thing that's been mentioned on the local NPR fairly regularly lately when they're talking about history. And there was this historical event where somebody was coming. Was it Nixon? Somebody was coming to Portland, and the Portland leaders were worried that there was going to be riots, and so they actually organized a hippie music festival to happen outside of the city and somewhere in the countryside.
You seem to be aware of this, Steve.
I just can't remember the name of what that. Yeah, Tim Calvert's done a lot of research on that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But I heard an interview with the organizer of the festival, and I mean, and as far as he was concerned, it was a great thing they did, and they prevented a riot, and they gave everybody a good time. But from another perspective, it's a really insidious thing to do. But but that comes. I think that basically represents what the whole deal was with college campuses from post 60s. I mean, one of the things that because the 60s was a really I think it would be hard to overstate what an existential crisis the 60s was for the authorities in this country. I mean, in so many ways it was an existential crisis. In terms of their ability to prosecute a war, their ability to they didn't invade any other countries directly for quite a while after Vietnam. And I think direct consequence of the anti-war movement, they really lost the hearts and minds of a massive swath of the U.S. population. And the college campuses were a prime example of places that were just out of their control in so many ways. And one of the ways that they tried to sort of claw back some kind of control over the scene on the campuses was by funding left-wing student groups. And funding feminist groups, and funding black groups and Latino groups, and funding student activity boards, and funding everything. And this meant that if groups wanted to take advantage of the funding, they had to not take over the administration building, and they had to not have do illegal things and have civil disobedience. That you didn't get funding for that. You got your funding taken away for that. But if you wanted to host speakers and host musicians and rent a bus to go travel to a protest and whatever other things that were legal, then you could use the funding. And so that funding existed and really supported so many people in so many ways, and was such a positive thing, I would say, even though I understand like it started with a negative intent to control us. The overall effect is very positive. But then I think the specifics about this lawsuit between the United States Student Association and the government around left-wing student groups, and having a right-wing student group to counter any left-wing presentation. This is the kind of stuff that the U.S. Student Association lost this important lawsuit around free speech and stuff. And that was around 1998, I think. And I don't know all the details of that because I think that, but I don't know all the details, but I think that the bottom line is the student movement was no longer threatening, and it took I think that had been the case for quite a while. And it took the government a while to kind of, or the powers that be a while to kind of figure this out and realize, oh, we don't need to be throwing money at them anymore. They're docile. And throwing the money at them is actually creating problems, because you got groups like the Student Environmental Action Coalition and Earth First and the Black Student Association, so many other groups that were the Muslim students. So many groups, pro-Palestine groups, so many groups that were getting doing so much and to educate people by bringing speakers and musicians and others to their campuses, and networking and renting buses and going to protests, all this kind of stuff that was going on in the 90s, that stopped. And that was, so there's a lot of, they wanted to stop it, I think.
Interesting. Has there been any kind of campaign to sort of bring that back, or has anybody sort of?
It's one of those things that seems to have happened without anybody noticing. Like, I mean, I don't know. When I talk to other musicians and people that I know, people who are speakers in that kind of circuit, who are involved with these road shows and all that stuff that was happening 20, 25 years ago, I rarely meet people who understand that the big picture of why they don't get those gigs anymore. Mm-hmm. And I meet a lot of people who seem to think that it's their fault. I mean, a lot of musicians.
Yeah, the only mention I've really heard of it in recent years was comedians talking about, like, I'm not doing college campuses anymore because I get protesters, I get stuff thrown at me, I get the people are not nice, like they people are that's what I've. That's what, mostly that's the only mention I've really heard of it in recent years was comedians complaining that they don't play campuses anymore because college campuses anymore because they are mistreated. But and that. But so those would be people that were still like a comedian is not considered particularly militant or but they might say something that was offensive to somebody, and then somehow that was like that ended up being that they got that they were like had their show canceled at the last minute before they could perform, stuff like that. And that's the only real mention of it I've heard out there in the world.
Back in the day when college gigs were plentiful, I never had that kind of stuff happen. I mean, my gigs were always sponsored by left-wing groups like anti-war, pro-Palestine, or environmental, labor, whatever else. And, I had lots of music out that was already, potentially going to offend people like the Promised Land, for example. Lots of songs like that. And, never had gigs get canceled because somebody decided I was anti-Semitic or something like that. That never used to happen in this country. It never used to happen. It happened in Germany, around that time, but it never happened in this country until just in the past 3 years. It's.
You've had things canceled here when you were scheduled to perform somewhere and they canceled you.
Yeah, and since January 2021, that has become a fairly regular occurrence in the United States. And on the rare occasions that I get a gig in this country, the people who are trying to cancel all my gigs have succeeded in getting a bunch of them canceled, and over the past several years. And they've succeeded in getting gigs canceled in England and in Germany and other countries, and they've succeeded in getting lots of discussions happening about whether the gig should get canceled. I mean, they have a real impact in terms of like just organizing a gig for me something that is going to be fraught with all kinds of problems. So.
And is that primarily surrounding that one interview that you did with that one person that was supposedly a deplorable?
Yeah, it started
was that mostly having to do with that, or is it just sort of in general?
Yeah, it started out with interviewing Matthew Heimbach, and then once they discovered that once I was on their radar as a member of the Red Brown Alliance and some kind of a closet fascist who was gonna and an anti-Semite, they never mentioned that my Jewish background. It doesn't seem to be relevant anymore. We're all just anti-Semites, whether we're of Jewish lineage or not.
Which is nuts.
Totally
that
nuts.
Was completely. I mean, any Jewish person was completely off the. You couldn't say that about them up until 5 years ago.
That's bizarre. I don't know how it changed, but somehow we're not self-loathing Jews anymore. We're anti-Semites.
Yeah.
It's really bizarre.
Yeah.
But that crowd, for that crowd, once they find out that you've done something wrong, then anything that you've done, all your songs and your whole body of work, your whole life, your everything, doesn't matter. It's totally irrelevant because this crowd is completely ideologically driven in a very puritanical kind of way, like a total black and white thinkers. They're completely incapable of any kind of nuance.
Do you regret having him on?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No.
What's his story? Is he really a white supremacist, or
not anymore? No, he's a very I would say first of all, it doesn't matter because
I remember you were telling to me that you can if you ever even remotely have anything to do with a white supremacist, it always has to be in the context of they're now reformed and they regret what they did very much. But if it's any sort of trying to reach out and understand a person who's different than you, or maybe trying to change their mind, like that's off the table. That somehow is support for that person, right? I remember seeing, I know this is silly, but I remember back in the 90s, Whoopi Goldberg had a show. She had Tom Metzger on,
right?
You know what I mean?
And leader of the White Aryan Resistance or something, right?
Right. And so you think, Whoopi Goldberg is a white supremacist? Like, you know what I mean? But on today's standards, that would be
Yeah.
someone would there would be a campaign against her for just platforming
Oh yeah.
this guy, even though the whole idea is that she had him on to disagree with him. You know what I mean? But that's amazing to me that you can't even. Anyway, you had told me that just in context, or that you had to have that person had to be now reformed, regretful of what they did for you to even touch them whatsoever. You know what I mean? But that to me seems totally antithetical to conversation and to trying to change someone's mind.
Yeah. No, we're not allowed to talk with anybody that has, disagreeable opinions, or that's platforming, right? And then, you can't, of course, in the case of former white supremacists, they have to be, vetted as former by the right sort of entities in order for these so-called anti-fascists to consider them former white supremacists. Like, you have to basically embrace sort of the liberal democratic narrative of reality. And if you are like some kind of a Republican or some kind of a Marxist or something like that, then you've failed the test. You have to convert to liberal democratic thinking in order to no longer be considered a Nazi. So what Heimbach did was he went from being a Nazi to being a sort of a Marxist-Leninist. And that's not acceptable. You can't make that transition, and apparently, so, but, the other, of course.
What's particularly offensive about that? I guess I'm not tracking.
I think for the so-called anti-fascist crowd, it's because, I don't know what their reasoning is, but when it comes down to it, the so-called anti-fascist crowd ends up supporting NATO and supporting Israel.
Funny how that works, huh?
It's funny, even though they will say that they don't believe in nations or borders or nation states, and that they don't believe, and they think the Palestinians are fine and shouldn't be killed. No, they'll say this kind of stuff, but ultimately, when through their circuitous logic, eventually it comes down to like, well, you have to support NATO and you have to support Israel, because basically you got two choices, and maybe neither one of them is so great, but you got to come down on the side of supporting Israel and supporting NATO, and so it makes me wonder about who these people are, especially when they use the same kind of sort of sexist, homophobic slurs and the same emojis and the same phrases as the Zionist trolls. So it's kind of I think that in some cases they are not the same people, but in other cases, I have no idea how come they're so similar to each other. But in recent weeks, it's been the Zionist trolls, the Hasbara trolls that unleashed on me by the UK Lawyers for Israel. That's been much more trolling than anything I've ever experienced before.
Do you think a handful of people hired a bot farm?
Yeah, and in this case of the UK, yes, I think the UK Lawyers for Israel are they're it's an app kind of thing that they get people to participate, and they get paid for trolling. I think that is the case with them.
So they're not actual. You think they're actual humans, but they're just.
I think they're paid humans. Yeah, I think so. But then, if they are bots, then it's possible. But because the bots if the bots wanted to pretend to be people that speak bad English, but that seems a little weird. Like if they were bots, I would imagine they'd get bots that spoke better English and could make more eloquent insults and stuff like that. Because the kind of the trolls that they are hiring oftentimes barely speak any English, and so they are not really very making a whole lot of sense, but they got the themes down anyway, so they can write something like "free the hostages" or don't support or you support baby rapers, or this kind of, they can say that kind of stuff, but when it comes to anything more, then it breaks down. Some of them are making long arguments, and others are just posting a few Israeli flag emojis, and
Speaking of NATO and the Democrats, where are you at with the Ukraine?
I could sing a song about it.
I'd love it.
It's let's see.
Is it one we can jam along with, or?
Oh yeah, sure.
Right. You want to give us a rundown?
Yeah, it's called "It's Not a Trade War."
Do you mind telling us a little bit about the key?
So, let's
chords
see.
and
Let
stuff?
me get it. What is it? Let me try to remember. I think it's in the key of, what is it? Might be D. Here it is.
We'll probably have somebody knocking on the door soon.
Oh yeah,
You might just want to prop it open a little bit.
it's open.
So let's see. Yeah, I think it's in the key of D. Tanks were rolling into Ukraine. The globe was horrified. There were calls for negotiations to heal this divide. Others called for sending missiles, armored trucks, and fighter planes. Let's see. I think it goes. No, here we go. Tanks were rolling into Ukraine. The globe was horrified. There were calls for negotiations to heal this divide. Others called for sending missiles, armored trucks, and fighter planes, and for sanctioning the Russians to block their shipping lanes. As the slaughter went on, did not take long at all for the war and the sanctions' first victims to fall. As the price of food skyrocketed, no fertilizer for the soil, and a doubling price of oil. But fear not, world, as long as you can pay. You can buy all the things you need from the USA.
Yeah, man.
By a freak coincidence, we've got these purple fields of green, growing lots of corn and wheat as long as we get rain in the commodity markets. Prices have quintupled, good time to tighten our belts, get extra fit and supple. Don't know about that pipeline, who made it explode, but now that you've lost your main source from where the gas once flowed, for 5 times the price, we've got all of it you need and a whole lot of corporate greed. But fear not, world, as long as you can pay. You can buy all the things you need from the USA. We've got your weapons too, in case you fear your neighbors, or the Russians or the Chinese start rattling their sabers. You might as well be ready, for when that time arrives, you'll want to stock your Air Force up with these F-35s. And if your country gets destroyed in the process of resistance, as you're picking up the broken pieces, if you need assistance, we can sell you steel, glass, lumber, and concrete in victory or defeat. But fear not, world, as long as you can pay. You can buy all the things you need from the USA. Fear not, world, as long as you can pay. You can buy all the things you need from the USA. Lovely.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the first questions on my mind is who's going to profit off this thing?
Isn't it a interesting coincidence that all the main things that Russia supplies the world with are also things that the United States is big in supplying the world with, like oil, gas, wheat, and arms? Yeah, funny coincidence.
Do you think that has a lot to do with this just endless Russophobia that doesn't seem to
Yeah, I think
seems to persist?
I
Come
think
on in.
so. Hey,
Hey, come on in, bud. Oh no, you're right. Yeah, come on in. Hey, you can just set your amp in the kitchen for now.
you've just entered the podcast now.
You're on air, Russ. Cool. Right on. Well, cool. Well, hey, David. good to have you on. Maybe we can pause for a second and set up. And if I think you have to split here.
I got to split.
You got to split here. Yeah, cool. Well, right on, man. Thanks so much for coming and hanging with us and talking with us.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Always good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I always feel like I got a million questions for you. It's like, how do we get paid as a musician? How do you travel as a musician? What's going on in
how do you write songs?
Palestine, write songs.
They're good questions. All good subjects.
Yeah. Right, yeah, so it always ends up being this kind of like explosive thing whenever we hang out.
Eclectic.
So, yeah, I appreciate it. Steve, you feel like playing us out with some...
Just remember that there is a theme song you could go out.
Yeah.